Yo, what's good, Celtics fans? Welcome back to another episode of Vitamin C's with me, Mr. Adam Taylor. I don't know why I always say Mr., but I do. And my boy, my homie, my compadre, my co host in crime, Mr. Tim Shields. What's going on, bruh?
Nothing much, man. I'm happy to hear that Robert Williams is okay. It sounds like he just tweaked his knee. Other than that, looking forward to the game.
Yo, so full disclosure, we had this whole Robert Williams video posted, and what our plan was record on the night time, post it the next day. Well, it just so happened that the timing didn't work out this well because obviously Rob Williams felt that sharp pain in his leg and didn't play the second half of the Cavs game. So we nixed that episode. That episode is in the trash. No one will ever see it, unfortunately. It's quite a good episode too. However, before we get into today's episode, what I would really appreciate you doing is you see that nice button in big red, it says subscribe. Hit that, touch that, just caress it a little bit, make it feel happy about itself. Press it, then I'll feel happy about myself, and we're all going to be good. Subscribe, like, share. You know the drill. You can see my socials here: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube, which you're on. So if you're on there, you should already be following, or at least hopefully you will follow. Tim's is a little bit different. He's just got Twitter there, but hiding behind our nice little banner is Instagram too. So make sure you show some love there. Okay, so with all the promotion out the way, I will promote again at the end because, what's life without a little bit of free promotion for yourself? We're going to look at Jaylen Brown. I think one of the most important things that hasn't been discussed enough, like we've seen people talk about how the Celtics have been playing. We see people talking about they need Jaylen Brown back, but no one's really looked at, and I'm not doing a stat dive, mainly just because I could, and I could pull up loads of videos, but then YouTube's going to demonetize the episode, and we don't even get paid yet. So I don't want to upset YouTube before we're at that point. So we're going to just explore the narrative of how much impact Jaylen Brown's absence has actually had. And obviously, we're going to be looking primarily at offense because the defense has been legit since their team meeting, their unproductive team meeting. So since that day where they had an unproductive players only meeting, the Celtics are first in defensive rating. The first overall since that meeting, they have been the best defensive team in the NBA. I don't know how much I'd put down unproductive and a huge jump from 25th in defensive rating to first in. That's a big jump. Very unproductive. That players meeting shouldn't have happened apparently. Anyway, Jaylen Brown hasn't been there for most of that, but one thing that they are hurting with is that offensive side of the floor. And I think that part of that is obviously down to Jason Tatum's struggles. I know everybody's got their own opinion on why he's struggling, if he's actually struggling, or it's his time. People, so I know people think he's trying to make a beeline out of Boston. I call bullshit, but there we go. But primarily the offense struggles because Tatum's struggling. But if Jaylen Brown was there, things would be different. So there is a huge impact in Jaylen Brown not being on the floor, as you would expect from not having an all-star. Go figure. But Tim, where you at with this, man? How you feeling about this? No Jaylen Brown, a little bit of struggles offensively, and do you think the team is where it's at now defensively if Jaylen Brown had been healthy? That's a very important question. The answer is yes, by the way.
I was going to say, I think it's yes and yes. I think their offense would be a lot better with Jaylen Brown, even if you're thinking, even take his stats out of the way for just a second, even though I believe so far he's been the Celtics' best all-around player. He's definitely been their best offensive player, by far the most consistent option that they have on offense. Even if you take that out, just on paper, having Jaylen Brown out on the floor, that provides some kind of gravity. So players have to account for him on defense. They can't leave him open. He's always going to be a threat, and that makes it easier for other guys around him. So it's going to take some of that load, some of that defensive pressure off of Jason Tatum. So like just off the bat, and if you look at the way that the Celtics are built right now, they're built around the Jays. They're depending on the Jays taking that leap, and you need both of them there in order for your offense to work because not a lot of shooting on the roster, at least on paper, not a lot of shooting on the roster without guys taking massive steps forward. Now, in terms of defense, I think Jaylen Brown at one point was really bad in terms of slacking a little bit or falling asleep at the wheel when it comes to off-ball defense, but he's still a massive part of that defense. And even when you look at it now on paper, having that flexibility at the wing, a guy who can play the 2 and the 3 without there being too much of a drop-off, like that's important to have that kind of guy in your rotation. But I think offensively, that's really where you're missing him because I don't think the defense would fall off a cliff if Jaylen Brown comes back. I think it's quite the opposite. I think offense leads to good defense because you're not putting up bad shots, you're not missing buckets, it's not burning on you on the other end because you're struggling to get back in transition. And I think that's another reason why their defense was struggling as well earlier on. I think their offense struggled and it made their defense worse, and it exacerbated issues that were already there. It is interesting to think that the defense got better, but the offense has kind of just been up and down sort of since that meeting. You figured it would be like the other way around, but no, it's defense has been through the roof.
And you know what, for me, like you kind of hit on two things there that I want to touch on. So we'll start with the defense first. We'll go defense because defense is what wins championships. I said it. No, seriously though, defense. I think that Jaylen Brown's off-ball defense does, as you said, fall to sleep at the wheel sometimes. But he's also an athletic presence. He's somebody that has a long wingspan, has great vertical and lateral quickness, can fight through screens, very good screen navigation, and very good help defense when he's switched on. So not having somebody with with those athletic tools, along with his level of on-ball defense, because a few years ago we were saying Jaylen Brown could become one of the best on-ball defenders in the league. Well, on-ball wing defenders in the league, to be more specific. Obviously, there's been a bit of regression there, but when he was playing, he did look like he was starting to get back to that type of on-ball defensive level. And the way the Celtics are running their switch everything system now, since they've moved away from switch absolutely everything to switch most stuff, it's not switch everything, it's switch most stuff. And since they've done that, I think that that would suit Jaylen Brown's type of defense more, because that having to switch and stay switched on will ensure that you can't fall asleep at the wheel, because you will just get caught out. You need to be understanding when it's time to rotate. Are you pre-rotating switches because you're asking your big man to move on to the perimeter? If you're pre-rotating switches, or pre-switching screens is the better way of saying it, then your wing and your guard, or your big and your wing, whoever the two guys are that are switching, need to be communicating. And I think that level of vocalization stops guys from falling to sleep, because there's just so many instructions being barked out all the time that you have to be tuned in. So I think Jaylen Brown could potentially make this defense a little bit better. I don't know if that's possible. I mean, we're talking in their last 7 games, they've won 5. 5 of those games, they've held teams below 100 points. You know what I'm saying? Only 2 of those games that they've won have a team scored over 90, and that was 92 and like 96, I think it was, or something like that. So there's a big issue there. Offensively, again, I think that athleticism helps. I think having somebody that can attack off rip throughs, that can attack off DHOs, and just literally turn the corner and blow. You've seen what Dennis Schroeder's change of pace has been doing to teams. Now imagine being able to run imagine a weave action, which is a dribble handoff into another dribble handoff. Imagine running a weave action where Dennis Schroeder receives the first handoff and then runs it into Jaylen Brown's for Jaylen Brown to turn the corner and explode. Being able to utilize that speed and that athleticism is a huge deal. Plus, you get Jaylen Brown is actually one of the only guys outside of Grant Williams that looks consistent from 3, or looked consistent from 3. So you've got actual spacing available to you. At the moment, Tatum's being asked to do a lot of stuff on a floor where people aren't really respecting the shooters around him. Al Horford with the above the break 3 is quite reliable. I like that. And him and Tatum have like this nice little pick and pop action that they went to a few times against Cleveland that worked quite well. And then obviously you've got the driving kick over to Grant. But having Jaylen Brown there as a cutter, as a screener, and as a passing outlet for somebody to hit threes or attack on secondary drives, that's a huge miss, man. And I think that Dennis Schroeder, as much as he frustrates the life out of me in certain plays, I think that he's playing the way he's playing because the secondary offense needs to come from somewhere. And when Jaylen Brown's not there, who else is it going to be?
Yeah, and I think tying into that with it comes down to like rim pressure, the way that Schroeder is able to get to the rim with his speed. Having anyone like that or in that same category, like the first one that comes to mind is Jaylen Brown. Like he's excellent at getting to the cup. And that makes it a lot easier because you have to account for him. It opens up opportunities for driving kick. And again, like if you have to have someone who's cutting to the rim and drawing potentially a second defender, it means that somebody else is open. I trust Jaylen Brown to move the ball and make that smart decision. And again, like it comes down to how far this Celtics team can get with the Jays. Like how far can they go? And he's a key part of that because so far, what I've seen the past few years, and this isn't a shot against Tatum because I think Tatum's highs vastly outweigh his lows. But I think Jaylen Brown has very much been the weather vane of how good a Celtics team is going to be. Like when he's playing his best ball, he's just so consistent. Like rarely ever do you have an issue where you're saying, wow, Jaylen Brown just has been awful for 6 to 8 games straight. He's shooting under 40%. Like he looks out of it. He doesn't look invested. Like we've never had that kind of question when it comes to Jaylen Brown, I don't think. And, like falling asleep at the wheel at defense, yeah, like he still has his flaws. But what I'm saying is like, what you're getting consistently out of Jaylen
No
Brown.
such thing as perfection, man. Like there's always
Yeah.
going to be things to improve on, man. I
Yeah.
mean, for me, like, and I wrote about this probably about 2 weeks ago now, saying so. It feels like the other day. It weren't long enough ago to be a while ago, but it was very much that concept. Like, how often do we see Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have good games together? Right? It's very much Jason Tatum went off, Jaylen Brown went off. Tatum went off. Oh, and now 20 games into the season, we finally get a Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown going off at the same time. And I think that, I mean, you look like you disagree, so go ahead.
I'll only say this because I think that Charlotte game was a perfect example of it. I think that was the game where they combined for 74
Yeah, but
points.
how often do you see that? Is my point.
Well, to be fair, and I will say this now because it's something that's been happening lately, like Jason Tatum is very much off his offensive wagon, and I think it's
Yeah, but
causing
I'm
other
talking
problems
over
in the
their
team.
careers, dude. I'm like long term. Look back long term. How many games can you point to where you're like take? And I know that's a lot of games to look back on, but
Yeah.
how often, like, the saying that Tatum and Brown went off in the same game is of rarity. It's not commonplace, right? More commonplace is one of them gets hot, the other one takes the back seat, right?
Yes and no. Like I think I think to a certain point it's correct, but like there have been stretches where the Celtics had other scorers. Like there were times where they had Kemba Walker and Gordon Hayward or Kyrie Irving.
All of which, apart from Kyrie, the other two were meant to be tertiary options and ended up having to step into secondary options because the Celtics could never get their 1A and 1B to both have good nights together consistently.
Yeah, and I think I just like I think right now they're in a certain point where I think Jaylen Brown has grown offensively to the point where it's like, okay, he deserves a certain amount of looks. Like you can lean on him offensively, and you
Which you
should be
should.
able to, do that with Jason Tatum. So I guess the question is like, who's your 1A, who's your 1B now?
Yeah.
Can you go ahead and does that script flip to have Jaylen Brown offensively just a
So the
little bit
point I
higher
was
than Jason Tatum?
So the point I was trying to make was you need both of them as your part. You know what I mean? You need both to be having these consistent nights where they go off together. And the reason I was leading into this point was very much because of the off-ball movement. At the moment, if you rewatch that second half of the Cleveland game, if you follow me on Instagram, you'll see I posted something about this. If you don't follow me on Instagram, it's on the screen right now. You should do. And I was like, look, just in that second half against Cleveland, they ran some flex screen sets. They ran Schroeder setting an inverted flex that got Marcus Smart into a post up against Isaac Okoro. They were running stack pick and roll, which is Spain pick and rolls. They were using that Spain pick and roll as a decoy, getting Tatum to pop out and Horford to roll and seal to create driving lanes for the ball handler. They were running some wedge screens to get Tatum down into the post here and there. And my point of it is, they're doing all of this without Jaylen Brown. Now imagine it's not Marcus Smart that gets that flex screen from the corner into the paint. It's Jaylen Brown. You can run that consistently with good outcomes. You can't always run a set that gets Marcus Smart a post-up possession and expect good to happen. You can with Jaylen Brown, whether that's secondary creation out of the post or he finishes strong or he hits a turn away, whatever it may be. You can run that regularly. You can run a Spain pick and roll with Tatum popping as the decoy, but instead of having Marcus Smart as the ball handler, you have Jaylen Brown as the ball handler, attacking in an open lane off a seal. Do you know what I mean? And this is what I'm saying. There is a world where these two can thrive together, but it's down to a coach to develop a system that allows them to do so. I think that Brad Stevens, I always thought Brad Stevens was a hell of an X's and O's coach, but I think the more talented Jaylen and Jason became, the more limited Brad's offensive sets were because he let them do what they needed to do to get their numbers. Whereas if you see what they're having to do in Cleveland to get non-stars involved in the scoring more. Well, run that with Jaylen and Jason to get both of them going consistently, and then I think that offense takes a huge jump.
And I think that's the potential, right? Like, I think that's why you bring in a guy like Ime Udoka. Like, this is someone that the players liked, that they wanted to have as part of their future. So giving the chance with a new coach who can develop that system. And as much as you said about Brad Stevens being an X's and O's coach, he was at the college level. Like, he was running, to an extent, an adapted college offense. Like, he was going through everybody eats, everyone moves the ball around. And it was a lot of orientation of trying to see where they could get scoring from. And for Jason and Jaylen specifically, I think Udoka is going to be more demanding of them. There's more pressure to perform, to defend. And kudos to Udoka for trying to use the switch everything defense. I think it keeps people accountable. As you said, you can't fall asleep at the wheel. You have to be constantly active and mentally engaged on the defensive end, even if they're making changes. Like, if that's the motif that they have going forward, the same applies to offense. So it's just a matter of how they can find these looks for the Jays organically. And I think that means, no just walking the ball up in transition, like finding ways to get guys cutting to the hoop. And again, this comes down to Jaylen Brown being a mainstay in this offense. And I think that's really what they're missing right now. Like you said, having that offensive anchor, having a guy that you can be like, this guy's going to be able to get me 20 ton. And if I give him the right looks, if I give him the ball X amount of times, he'll be able to hit maybe 3-4 threes tonight. He'll be able to get in transition. He'll be able to get to the line a little bit. You can depend on him. He's not going to go ahead and go ice cold. And I think right now for this Celtics team, he's going to make the lives of other players, his teammates around him, easier. And I think that's ultimately what you need right now. You need a guy like that to make things easier for Jason Tatum specifically.
I agree. No, I completely agree. I do want to go back and touch on this though.
Mm-hmm.
Brad Stevens, you said, ran an adapted college offense, right? I'll agree with that to a certain extent, but I also think that Brad Stevens was quite innovative in the way he developed a college scheme into something that was very successful in the NBA.
True.
I'd also say that I don't know which one do you put more stock in here. A guy that's never been a head coach before, but has been an assistant in the NBA, or a guy that has been a successful head coach in college. Which one would you rather step up to be a first-time head coach in the league?
I think the guy who's been around longer. I think the guy who's been in the NBA is an assistant for a long time. I guess like the flip side of that is you're saying, a coach who's not been a head coach, but has been in the NBA as an assistant for a long time. You kind of have to ask yourself, okay, but why has he not been a head coach? That's your first thought process there. But we've also seen so many coaches who have been, elite college level coaches come to
John
the NBA.
Beeline comes to mind straight away as a recent example.
Yeah, I mean, Rick Pitino's another one, a guy who's extremely decorated coming to the NBA level and then just immediately bursting into flames, like crash and burn mentality for a lot of college coaches. Brad Stevens actually fought against that norm, and I will give him credit for that. Regardless of that stuff, I was going to say something about him potentially ever becoming a coach again, but I'll leave that as it is. But
we can do that another day.
Sure. I think with Udoka, though, I think it's being around those kind of environments. Being in the Spurs system's not easy. Being an assistant under Greg Popovich, who's a very demanding coach, I imagine he's just as demanding of his assistants as he is his players. And being in those locker rooms, even for his brief time in Philadelphia and his time with Brooklyn as well, being around superstar talent, seeing how they need to be handled, what they like offensively, what works, what doesn't work. It makes it a lot easier.
Tell you what's not working. Not running Via on offense. I think that's a big miss. For anyone listening, Via is when your big man sets a screen and then goes and sets a second screen. So he'll screen for the ball handler. When the ball handler comes off the screen, he'll go and set basically a pin down. And that's just all I'm doing on the perimeter. And Brad Stevens didn't use it very much either, but he started to towards the end of last season. I think when you've got Al Horford there, having Al Horford run Via sets where he's setting a screen for the ball handler, then setting a pin down and then popping is going to be a huge upgrade for that offense. It will be, as Tim's showing on the screen, it will be money. We haven't seen any Via right now. I think it's also the same with Robert Williams. But the downside with Robert Williams running Via is you don't get that rim pressure off the initial roll from the pick and roll. So I can see why you run it less with him. But with somebody like Al Horford or even Grant Williams as a small ball five that's shooting over 40% from free at the moment, having him, and I think Grant Williams is actually a very underrated screener because of his strength. Having Grant Williams run via and then popping out is another option on that offense. And I think that's the one thing for everything good that Ime Udoka's done. When it's half court sets and I see the Celtics struggling to figure it out, I'm screaming, just run a veer set and just see what happens, man. You know what I mean? Because then you've got somebody driving with the ball. You've got a shooter that's lifting out of the corner, getting a pin down from the second part of the veer screens. And then you've got Al Horford either rolling down or popping out to the corner. There's just going to be so many options available for you, especially if that player that's lifting out is like Aaron Neesmith or Romeo Langford. I mean, Romeo's look great from the corner, so maybe you'd set the screen for Romeo to sink into the corner rather than lift out of it. But either way, you get my ideas. Just a little caveat of the offensive system that I'd like to see implemented.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that would help, as you said, with off-ball scoring specifically, making it easier for guys who can't really self-create. I think honestly, any kind of off-ball movement would help. Any kind of like early action like that would really make it a lot easier for guys to get going.
They've started using a little bit of pistol. They ran a little bit of pistol the last few games. It's looked good. They've done a pistol. What have they done? They've used pistol pitch. They've used pistol 20. They've used 21 where it's guard on guard action. They've used basic pistol where it's two guards on the wing and then you run one of them into a screen. They've done quite a few good things pistol-wise, but when Dennis Schroeder's your ball handler, early offense isn't really what's going to happen, is it? Because he's going to use the early offense to find a mismatch and then go ISO. So we'll have to see how that works long term.
Agreed with that.
I think we can wrap it up unless you got anything you want to say.
No, I wanted to save some stuff for the next episode.
So we're going to chill until the next episode. Hit that subscribe button, hit that share button. Thank you very much. You've had your daily dose. It's not your daily dose anymore. You've had your regular dose of Celtics vitamins. Namaste.